The lab report comes back. The doctor scans it. And then comes the sentence that feels like relief, like a pass, like permission to stop worrying. Your cholesterol looks fine. And you go home, and you stop thinking about it. And somewhere inside the walls of your arteries, a process continues that the number your doctor looked at was never fully equipped to reveal. This happens every day, in every city, to seniors who are doing everything right, taking their medication, attending their appointments, bringing their lab results, and who are being reassured by a number that tells part of the cholesterol story and misses the parts that may matter most. I'm Dr. Eleanor Bennett. Subscribe to this channel before we continue, because what I am about to tell you about cholesterol is not a supplement advertisement or a dietary shortcut. It is a clinical reality that most seniors never encounter until the cardiovascular event they were supposed to be protected against has already happened. Let me start with a question that should reshape the way you look at every cholesterol panel you have ever received. What is the cholesterol test actually measuring? Because the answer is more complicated and more important than most people realize. The standard lipid panel that most seniors receive measures 4 things. Total cholesterol, the aggregate of all cholesterol in the blood. LDL cholesterol, often called bad cholesterol, the type associated with artery plaque buildup. HDL cholesterol, often called good cholesterol, associated with cardiovascular protection. And triglycerides, a type of blood fat that carries its own cardiovascular implications. For decades, LDL was the primary target of cardiovascular risk assessment and medication. Statins were developed to lower LDL. Treatment guidelines were built around LDL targets. Patients were told their LDL number and advised that lower was better. And all of that is not wrong. LDL cholesterol is genuinely important. Elevated LDL is genuinely associated with cardiovascular risk. The medications that lower it genuinely reduce events. But LDL, as measured in a standard lipid panel, is not a simple uniform measurement. It is an estimate typically calculated from the other values in the panel rather than measured directly. That represents the total amount of LDL cholesterol in the blood. And the number the estimate produces does not tell you something that has become increasingly clear in cardiovascular research. The size and density of the LDL particles matters, as much as their total quantity. And a senior with a normal-looking LDL number may have a particle profile that poses substantial cardiovascular risk, while a senior with a slightly elevated LDL may have a particle profile that is far less dangerous than the number suggests. Let me tell you about Richard. Richard was 68 on a statin for 3 years and had been consistently told his cholesterol was well controlled. His LDL was below the target his cardiologist had set. His total cholesterol was acceptable. He felt reassured as anyone would, with numbers that consistently hit target. He exercised. He ate reasonably. He was a model of cardiovascular effort. At 69, Richard had a heart attack. Not a massive one, a moderate event that was caught and treated and from which he recovered reasonably well. But when the cardiovascular workup that followed the event was completed, something appeared in his risk profile that had never been evaluated. His LDL particle number, the count of actual LDL particles in his blood, rather than the cholesterol they contained, was significantly elevated. His particles were small and dense, a pattern that is particularly prone to penetrating artery walls and contributing to plaque. His standard LDL number had looked acceptable because he had relatively fewer milligrams of cholesterol per deciliter, but he had a high number of small, dangerous particles that the standard test had never been designed to reveal. Richard's heart attack was not a mystery once the full picture was assembled. It was a predictable outcome of a risk that had been present but unmeasured. His doctor had been looking at the right report and missing the right question. Now let me tell you about HDL, because the good cholesterol story is not as simple as the number suggests. And the HDL misconception may be one of the most consequential misunderstandings in senior cardiovascular health. HDL cholesterol is protective. That is true. HDL particles travel through the bloodstream and remove cholesterol from artery walls, transporting it back to the liver for processing, a process called reverse cholesterol transport. Higher HDL is generally associated with lower cardiovascular risk. So far, so consistent with what most seniors have been told. But here is what the HDL number does not tell you. HDL particle function varies. HDL particles can be healthy and actively engaged in reverse cholesterol transport, or they can be dysfunctional, carrying the right label but doing the wrong work. Dysfunctional HDL particles may actually contribute to inflammation and oxidative stress in artery walls rather than protecting against them. And a senior whose HDL number looks reassuringly high may have a proportion of dysfunctional HDL that the standard test cannot distinguish from functional HDL. The number looks like protection. The biology may not be providing it. There is also the question of HDL particle size. Large HDL particles are generally more effective at reverse cholesterol transport than small ones. A senior with a moderate HDL number dominated by large functional particles may have better actual protection than a senior with a high HDL number dominated by small, dysfunctional ones. The standard lipid panel tells you neither the size nor the function of the HDL, only its total quantity. This matters because it means the senior who is told their HDL is good, and therefore their cholesterol balance is favorable, may be receiving a reassurance that the science has increasingly complicated. HDL is important. HDL function and particle composition are more important. And most senior patients never hear the second sentence. Now let me talk about triglycerides. Because triglycerides are the number in the standard lipid panel that receives the least attention, generates the least conversation, and may be one of the most important warning signs hiding in plain sight. Triglycerides are a type of fat in the bloodstream. They come primarily from dietary carbohydrates and fats, and their levels fluctuate based on recent meals, alcohol intake, physical activity, and metabolic factors. A fasting triglyceride level below 150 milligrams per deciliter is generally considered normal. Above 200 is elevated. Above 500 can become dangerous acutely, and most seniors are told, if their triglycerides are anywhere below 200, that this aspect of their panel is fine. But emerging research has consistently shown that triglycerides, even in the moderately elevated range 150 to 199, are an independent risk factor for cardiovascular events, particularly when they are elevated in the context of normal or low LDL. This pattern, low or normal LDL, elevated triglycerides, low HDL, is called atherogenic dyslipidemia, and it is the lipid pattern most strongly associated with metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance, and the type of cardiovascular risk that standard LDL-focused assessment systematically misses. Margaret was 71, on a statin with an LDL that consistently hit target. Her HDL was acceptable, but her triglycerides had been running between 180 and 220 for 3 years above the technically normal range, but not dramatically so, and never the subject of a sustained clinical conversation. She was not told this was a warning. She was not told this pattern-controlled LDL with persistently elevated triglycerides and borderline HDL was associated with residual cardiovascular risk, even in treated patients. She was told her cholesterol was managed. Margaret had a stroke at 73. Her LDL had been at target throughout. The atherogenic dyslipidemia pattern that had been visible in 3 consecutive years of lipid panels had never been connected to a specific treatment or referral. The information was there. The interpretation that would have acted on it was absent. Let me tell you about the measurement that most labs do not run by default, and that may be the most informative single number in assessing a senior's true cardiovascular risk. It is called ApoB, apolipoprotein B. It is a protein that sits on the surface of LDL particles and several other atherogenic lipoprotein particles. And because there is exactly one ApoB molecule per atherogenic particle, the ApoB number directly counts the total number of atherogenic particles in the blood, not the cholesterol they contain the particles themselves. This matters because particle number, not particle cholesterol content, is what determines how many opportunities there are for a particle to penetrate an artery wall and contribute to plaque. A senior with a normal LDL and a high ApoB has a high particle number, more opportunities for artery wall penetration, despite looking acceptable on the standard test. A senior with a slightly elevated LDL and a normal ApoB may have fewer particles and lower actual plaque risk than the LDL number suggests. ApoB testing is available. It is not exotic or experimental. It is recommended by multiple cardiovascular medical societies as a superior marker of cardiovascular risk compared to calculated LDL, particularly in patients with metabolic syndrome, diabetes, or the atherogenic dyslipidemia pattern I described. And yet it is not ordered as part of the standard lipid panel. It requires a specific request. Most seniors on statins have never had their ApoB measured. They have been managed on a number that estimates particle cholesterol, rather than counting particles, and in a meaningful proportion of cases, that estimate has been wrong in the direction of false reassurance. Norman was 69, on a statin for 5 years, LDL consistently at target. told at every annual visit that his cardiovascular risk was well managed. He had a heart attack at 70. When ApoB was finally measured as part of the post-event workup, it was significantly elevated, had likely been elevated throughout his 5 years of statin therapy, even as his LDL was responding well to the medication. His statin had lowered the cholesterol content of his LDL particles. It had not lowered the particle count sufficiently. ApoB would have revealed that. ApoB was never measured. Let me address something that I hear in clinic with a frequency that genuinely concerns me. The belief deeply held, thoroughly understandable, and often encouraged by how cholesterol management is communicated, that being on a statin means cardiovascular risk is handled. It is not. A statin is a powerful tool. It is not a guarantee. And the gap between those two statements is where residual cardiovascular risk lives in millions of seniors who believe their prescription has solved the problem. Statins lower LDL cholesterol effectively and significantly. In patients with established cardiovascular disease or high cardiovascular risk, they reduce the rate of major events, heart attacks, strokes, by meaningful amounts. This is real, robust, replicated science. Statins work, but statins do not eliminate risk. They reduce it. And in a significant proportion of patients, particularly those with atherogenic dyslipidemia, high triglycerides, low HDL, or elevated ApoB, the residual risk that remains despite statin therapy is substantial. These patients continue to have events. They continue to form plaque. They continue to be surprised by cardiovascular outcomes their LDL number did not predict. And they often carry a belief that because they are compliant with their statin, they have done what was needed. They have done part of what was needed. The part the test was designed to measure. The parts the test was not designed to measure may still be driving risk in the background. Victor was 74, on a statin for 7 years, LDL consistently below 100. He exercised regularly, did not smoke, managed his blood pressure, and considered himself, with good reason, a cardiovascular success story. He had a second heart attack, the first had been at 68, before the statin at 74. When his lipid panel was reviewed in detail after the second event, the ApoB was measured for the first time. It was elevated, suggesting that despite excellent LDL control, his particle count had remained high throughout 7 years of therapy. His triglycerides had been borderline elevated for years. His non-HDL had been above target at every panel, but had never been the subject of a clinical conversation. Victor had been on the right medication. He had not been on the complete treatment plan that his full lipid picture required. And 7 years of believing the statin had handled the problem had been 7 years during which residual risk was accumulating into the event that arrived at 74. This is not an argument against statins. It is an argument for not letting a statin number become the end of the cardiovascular conversation. The conversation should include the full lipid profile, the non-HDL, the triglycerides as a pattern over time, and ideally ApoB. And it should happen at every significant lipid review, not just when the LDL number changes. So what does this mean practically? It means the conversation at your next appointment needs to go beyond your LDL number. It means asking your doctor not just whether your cholesterol is at target, but what your triglycerides have been doing over the past 2 to 3 years, and whether the pattern is concerning. It means asking whether your HDL number reflects genuine protective function or simply a quantity that has never been evaluated for quality. It means asking whether an ApoB test has ever been performed, and if not, whether the pattern of your lipid values suggests it would be informative. These are not complicated requests. They are the questions that separate cholesterol management from cholesterol monitoring. Monitoring records a number. Management interprets the full picture and acts on what it finds. There is one more measurement worth mentioning, one that requires a specific blood test separate from the standard panel that is not affected by statins. And that reveals a cardiovascular risk factor that is entirely genetic and cannot be lowered through lifestyle. It is called lipoprotein A, written as LPA. It is a modified form of LDL that is particularly prone to contributing to plaque and clot formation, and elevated levels are present in approximately 20% of the population, including many seniors who have never heard of it. LPA is not changed by diet. It is not meaningfully changed by statins. It is determined almost entirely by genetics. And a senior with elevated LP who has been managing their LDL carefully and assuming their cardiovascular risk is handled may be carrying a significant inherited risk factor that no amount of LDL management addresses. The test is available It needs to be ordered specifically. Most seniors have never had it measured. If you have a family history of early heart disease, a parent or sibling who had a heart attack or stroke before age 60, asking about LPA testing is one of the most important cardiovascular conversations you can have with your doctor. Not because the result changes every treatment plan, because it changes the picture. And a complete picture is the only foundation for complete management. Let me tell you about Helen. Helen was 72, on a statin for 6 years, had never had a cardiovascular event, and considered her lipid management a settled and successful aspect of her health. At a routine visit, a new physician reviewed her full lipid history for the first time, rather than evaluating only the most recent panel. She noticed a pattern. LDL consistently at target, but triglycerides persistently elevated, HDL lower than ideal, and a non-HDL cholesterol, the total cholesterol minus HDL, which captures all atherogenic lipoproteins together, that was consistently above the recommended threshold. She ordered an ApoB. It was elevated. She referred Helen for a formal cardiovascular risk assessment that had never been performed. The assessment identified subclinical arterial changes that indicated her actual risk was higher than her managed LDL suggested. Her treatment was adjusted. Dietary changes were targeted at the triglyceride pattern specifically. And Helen, for the first time in 6 years of confident management, understood that her cholesterol panel had been telling a more complex story than anyone had read to her. She told me the thing I hear too often and still find difficult to accept. She said, "I thought when the doctor said fine, it meant fine. I didn't know fine could have an asterisk." Your cholesterol panel has an asterisk, not necessarily a dangerous one, but the asterisk is the part nobody reads to you in that sentence. Your numbers look fine. Fine for what? Fine by which measure? Fine at the level of the test that was ordered, or fine at the level of the full picture of what is accumulating in your artery walls? You deserve to know which fine you are being told. You deserve the full sentence, not just the number, but what the number is measuring, what it is missing, and what the pattern of your values over time is actually saying about the state of your arteries. The questions in this video are how you ask for it. Ask them at your next appointment. Ask them specifically. And do not leave satisfied with a reassuring adjective where a complete clinical picture should be. Share this with someone who has been told their cholesterol is fine and has never thought to ask what fine actually means. Subscribe to this channel, and I will see you in the next video.